Peace, y'all. Somebody had posted something about the DNA test results, and I always had thoughts about these, and I wanted to talk about them. So I want to talk about why I don't trust them. If you think about this, first of all, I want to say about DNA, there's a lot of people that you hear make arguments, containing DNA and saying these different things and saying, listen, based on DNA this, based on DNA that. But I spent some time in science classes in school, and I always knew one thing about DNA is that it's fluid. It can change. DNA changes over time. Just one example of DNA is the fact that if you look at most humans, we have about 99 point something high percent DNA similar with one another. If you look at when they measure up DNA, we're about 96 or 94%. With apes, we have similar DNA. So DNA is a very tricky thing. So when you hear people start throwing DNA at you, like, well, according to the 100% DNA evidence, the only thing now when you're talking about paternity or being able to see how things are related to one another, that's pretty solid. But when you're talking about other things, you just have to understand DNA can change. You got epigenetics where each generation things can be picked up or can change based on your actions. So whenever you hear someone throwing DNA at you, just always be very cautious is all I'm saying, because there's a lot to DNA, and there's a lot to DNA that has not been discovered yet, and there's a lot of new information still coming out about DNA. Now, when we talk about people saying that they can take some of your DNA, and I'm just speaking about this from an African American perspective, where we have a conundrum where we don't know where we're from, particularly on the continent, like a lot of people do. A lot of people know, hey, I'm from Nigeria, I'm in the Igbo tribe, my father's name is this, his father's name is this, his mother's name is this, and we don't know these things. So you got people claiming that, listen, I can give you a DNA test, and this DNA test can tell you this is where on the continent that you're from. And a lot of people get them, and I've heard people say, I got the DNA test, and the DNA test told me that I'm 45% from Angola, 68% from Nigeria, and all of this kind of stuff. But this is my question, and this is why I don't trust it. So firstly, one of the methods that I hear that I'm told that they use is they can trace your mitochondrial DNA, which is DNA that is passed through your mother, right? And they can trace that all the way back until they look at other haplogroups, basically other groups that share that DNA that looks similar to the DNA that you have. But I have a big problem with that, because if they took us from different places, like here's a few places when you read history, few areas that exist today that didn't exist by these names in the past that we know we came from: Ghana, Angola, and the Congo. I'll just use those three: Ghana, Angola, and the Congo. So let's say they trace your mitochondrial DNA. If most of us can go back generations, like most African Americans, I'm 29, so I could go back to like my great great grandparents were here on the continent. I mean, here, in this continent, you know what I mean? And a lot of them were in Illinois. So if we just go back that far, and we trace the mitochondrial DNA from my mother to her mother to her mother to her mother, if my great great grandmother was from Angola, and then my great great grandfather was from Nigeria, by the time that got passed down 5 generations, and they're only looking at the mitochondria, so they're only looking at the mother. So that Angola that my great grandfather was, that gets thrown out the window. And then whatever my great grandfather was, that gets thrown out the window. And then whatever my grandfather was, that gets thrown out the window. And then we have to look at beyond the fact that you're cutting off half every single time you go, you have to look at the fact that my great grandmother had already been the result of admixtures from being on plantations and being here in in America. So she already was mixed with different things. So my great grandmother probably had Angola, the Congo, Nigeria. She probably already had like 4 things, because it only would have took 2 generations for her to be mixed with 4 different African nations or groups or haplogroups. So that's just one person. You know what I mean? So you got to think that's for your great great grandmother, then your great grandfather could have all had different admixtures of different nations and different tribes and different areas and groups that they came from. So how are you going to tell me you can reach back that far and you can tell me based on now we're dealing with like 16 different people of my parents, 16 or 20 different of my parents that all would have to be mixed with all these different tribes, because if they had the same tribes, they would have known who they were. If they were of the same tribe, they would have known who they were. Somehow it would have been passed down. But they took people, if you read history, they broke people up so they wouldn't know who they were. They would lose pride and they would be confused about it. So how can you tell me, you can tell me where I came from, and you have all these different mixtures and admixtures of people that have happened. So that's why, I don't really trust it. How can you tell me where precisely I was from? I have too many parents. I have too many parents that are from too many different places. So that's personally why I don't trust that. There's just too many different ways that it could have been mixed up. And in the end of the day, we know the general area that we come from. I don't think we should be too hung up on exactly the precise place that we came from. You know what I mean? Because logically, I do not see how you could find that. Now, if there's someone who knows better than me, because I could be wrong about this, but like I said, the two ways that I'm familiar with, I know they can trace your mitochondrial DNA, which is unique and it stays with the mother. But that only gives you half the story, half the time. So for my direct parents, it gives me half of the story. For my grandparents, it gives me a fourth of the story. For my great grandparents, it gives me an eighth of the story, and so on. And it just gets worse and worse and worse. And you would have to go back. I don't even know how far they got to go back to get to the continent. And then I haven't even mentioned in the midst of all of this that I have white grandparents. Haven't even mentioned that. So some of them are white grandparents. How do you know? Because like I have a grandmother, all her well, not by birth, but just by marriage, all of her brothers and sisters are all dark and she's light. And nobody knows what happened. So it's like you got that person's mother, and then if you go back, you might have a white grandmother. So then all the African gets cut off if you have a white grandmother, and then how do you even know where it goes? So basically, I don't understand how that makes sense, and I just don't get it. They have mitochondrial, and they have a way of tracing it through the Y chromosome, which is given through the father. But even if you trace the Y chromosome given to you through the father, you run into the same I don't have to mention the white part, but you see what I'm saying? If you run into that, if I trace the Y chromosome, eventually I'm gonna have to get to a white person, and then the whole thing has to be cut off based on that logic if they're following that. So logically, it's a good chance that you'll never be able to find it. Now, to the people who are doing science, the people who know DNA better than me, because like I said, DNA is very tricky, DNA is very deep. There's a lot to DNA. I don't want to limit anyone, because anything can be done. One day, I believe if anybody can do it, an African person will be able to discover the science necessary for us to identify specifically where we're from in some type of way. So I don't want to limit anyone. But if that is not your walk in life, if that's not your journey, and you have no knowledge of that type of thing, I would advise you not to dwell on it. As a fellow African American, stolen African here in America, I would advise you not to dwell on it and not to worry too much about it, because it's a good chance you won't be able to find that out. But at the end of the day, man, it would be great if we could, but just focus on the ancestry that you do have here. Focus on finding exactly how far you can and what you can know. Ask your parents stories about their life. Ask them to get stories about their life. Recently, my father talked to, one of our great aunts about a lot of things, and passed that knowledge down to my little sister and talked to me about it. And, you can get what you can get here while we've been here with the family here that and I think you should focus on that. And we also should, because a sister actually inspired this. She had posted, because she's in Britain right now. Shout out to Delana. She's in Britain, if you're watching. And she said that, she's there. There's a lot of immigrants in the country that she's in. There's a lot of African immigrants. She said when she speaks to people, they say, well, where are you from? What's your ethnicity? Or what's your heritage? And she said, well, I'm an African American. Yeah, they'd be like, yeah, what part of Africa? What's going on? They always want to know, and then she tells them, I don't know. And to them, that's unfathomable, because people on the continent, they know exactly their history, and they can't fathom that you don't know that. Like, for a person to say, like, you know, something that's relatively common for African Americans, for a person to say, I don't know who my father is, that is, they cannot fathom that. They like, what do you mean you don't know that? How do you don't know how you're gonna know your family and where you're coming from? So, you know, a lot of people, I've heard people like her, or what I picked up from her, or like what I picked up from you know, some people, they get very down when they hear that. They're like, damn, man, how can I know? I don't know. You know, a lot of people say, how can you know where you're going? You don't know where you come from, man. And, you know, then they just get down like, man, what can I do? But we always have to keep in mind that you may not be able to get all these things, you know, but you can do anything, man. You know what I'm saying? Anything can be done. And you also have to keep in mind, Harriet Tubman, Frederick Douglass, a lot of these people didn't have access to the history that you have access to. You know, they didn't know necessarily the things about Africa that we even know. You know, they didn't even know that dark-skinned Africans did all the things they did in Kemet, or dark-skinned Africans did all the different things they did in Timbuktu, West Africa. They didn't know a lot of these different things, but they were able still to achieve greatness. You know what I mean? You had Booker T. Washington, you know, the things he did. Now, a lot of people are gonna say different things about what he did in his life and how he did it or whatever, and I don't want to debate that. But even if we go before he even began that journey, if you read up from slavery, just his journey on what he did before he was released from slavery, and his journey to even go to get educated, you know, you have to observe that, and you have to realize that, man, that brother, he didn't know that Queen Hatshepsut did this, or he didn't know about Queen Nzinga and how she fought people. And I meant to do a video on her during Black History Month. I'm gonna still get that for y'all, but you know, they didn't know these different things, but they still, you know, the greatness is within them. And wherever you're from, and whatever place you came from, even if you can't find it and, you know, trace it exactly and find the names and the documents and all these different things, you should always know that even whatever regardless of what they can trace on your DNA, all of these things in every single one of your grandparents, in every single place that you're from, wherever exactly you are from, you don't need to see it on a piece of paper. You just need to see it when you look in the mirror, because you are, every single one of your ancestors still living. You know, you're still an unbroken line. So don't focus so much on about what a scientist can read on a piece of paper and look through a microscope and read, and just read yourself, read your thoughts, read your mind and body, and identify with it, and be proud of that, exactly where you are, because you are still a walking version of every one of your ancestors, you know. So don't get too caught up on that. You know, we can still reach greatness. I don't want to say that it's not important to know exactly where you come from, because it is, and as much as you can find out, but the rest, just look within, because, you know, it's still you, man. But yeah, that's it. That's all I wanted to say, man. I hope y'all caught most of that. If not, just go back to the beginning. But yeah, peace. Who we got up in here? Some shout outs. Got Michael up in here, Minahati. See, Tarisha. What up, Tarisha? Lives, a lot of people came through tonight. But yeah, man, and I guess ain't really no questions. If it is, I didn't really read the questions tonight. But I'll holler at y'all though, man. Peace.